And Top Story is brought to you by Vodafone. Further together, I am Ernest Manu. It's been long in coming with several promises, missed deadlines, and its attendant effect on the macroeconomic stability of the country. But after several weeks and several months of negotiation, Ghana has reached a staff-level agreement with the International Monetary Fund for economic policies and reforms. The $3 billion extended credit facility is expected to help restore macroeconomic stability, address structural weaknesses, and also enhance resilience to the shocks the economy has suffered, while protecting the vulnerable, preserving financial stability, and laying the foundation for a strong and inclusive recovery. The Finance Minister, Akufo-Addo, has been given details of their negotiations with the fund, highlighting the deliverables that has culminated in this agreement.
I think the parameters are clear to us with regards to where the landing zone should be, and those are the bookends that we are talking about. 55% debt to GDP, and then 18% external debt service over revenue. So those become the bookends that we work with, and will then be the parameters as we have outlined in our domestic exchange program, and therefore also continuing with that, with the externals. We hope that, we've been having discussions, but maybe formalized discussions going through beginning, this week also. So that's the trajectory that we are looking at. But I think for all of these three partners with the debt operations, is really the lift that we have of this SLA, and therefore all of us doing our part to make sure that this confidence is built on, and we move on to create the macro stability, and that would then ensure that we all participate in a much stronger Ghana. So yes, the challenges that we'll have, we're going to have challenges with the parameters that we unfold for each of these groupings, and the issue for all of us is a commitment to end this crisis in a way, and so we'll have I expect that we'll have positive discussions, and as always move to a solution that would ensure that we remain within the landing zone that has been ascribed.
But as you may know, this is not the end of the deal, even though it's a major step to economic recovery. Already, you've seen the cedi gain some strength against the dollar and major trading currencies. Some analysts have attributed the performance of the cedi to the confidence investors are already showing in the process with the IMF. But to seal the deal, the staff of the IMF say they will need the assurance of our creditors on a debt restructuring program before they can present this staff-level agreement to the IMF Executive Board. Listen to Stefan Rude, who is the leader of the team from the IMF.
What is necessary for us to be able to present that program request to the board is assurances from Ghana's partners and Ghana's creditors that one, the program is fully financed. In other words, the financial support that will be provided to the authorities during the program period is sufficient to finance the program. And two, that the program taken together, the fiscal consolidation path, the comprehensive debt restructuring that the authorities have launched will be sufficient to re-establish debt sustainability. And so as soon as we have assurances from creditors that this will be the case, when sufficient progress has been made on that front, we will be able to present the program to our board. And as to the follow-up question that you had on when the money would hit Ghana's accounts, that would happen very, very shortly after the program has been approved by the board.
That is Stefan Rodeda, and you had him talk about the assurances from our creditors, and that is in reference to the debt exchange program that is happening domestically, but also, more importantly, restructuring our debt with our external creditors. So in response to this, the Finance Minister, Akufo-Addo, announced that government will now earnestly start negotiating with our external creditors to restructure our debt.
The SLA is only one aspect of the approval process. More is yet to be done to secure IMF management and board approval, and that is what we, all of us as Ghanaians, should work to ensure that we go through. Key fiscal measures, structural reforms, and the medium-term macro-fiscal framework in the 2023 budget are aligned with the IMF-supported program. It is therefore crucial that we receive support from all stakeholders, especially Parliament, to ensure that the 2023 budget, including all revenue measures, are passed and not return to last year's experience that we had. And the creditors also to ensure a successful debt operation. So even as we engage the domestic in the exchange, we'll be looking for our discussions with the bilateral partners and also with our bond investors. And we expect to get through that so that we'll conclude with the fund and the board.
Akufo-Addo, the finance minister. So very soon we will start engaging our external creditors to find out how we could restructure our debt in order to seal this deal that we have with the International Monetary Fund at the staff level. We need the executive board to approve of this, but as we've already learned from Sifan, we need the assurance from the creditors. But given the level of agitation and the rejection we've seen so far as the domestic debt exchange program is concerned, what are our chances of success? And is the IMF really taking note of the reactions from the stakeholders? We've already heard from the TUC and the other labor unions that are opposed to this. When asked the question, this is what the IMF said. Listen.
What is very important for the IMF is that the government strategy as a whole be sufficient to put debt on a sustainable path and to bring debt sustainability over the medium term. This is really the overarching goal of one of the overarching goals of the program. Now, when it comes to the specifics of the government's debt restructuring strategy, when it comes to, for example, the perimeter of the debt restructuring, which debt would be included or not included, when it comes to the parameters of the debt restructuring. In other words, what type of relief would be sought from one type of creditors or another. And when it comes to engagement between the government and the creditors, all of that are very much sovereign decisions, and they are very much for the government to decide on in collaboration with their financial and legal advisors.
Mm-hmm. It remains a sovereign decision. That is the IMF position on the agitation, the objection that we've seen so far by the stakeholders. So it begs the question, will the TUC and the other labor unions and the various stakeholders get their demand from government? Will the finance minister heed their plea? We'll hear from him shortly. Let me first take you to Parliament and speak to the ranking member on the Finance Committee of Parliament, Kezola Tuforsen. Doctor, he joins us. Thank you very much, sir, for your time here on Top Story. Before we move into the demand that you're making, asking that the deal be brought before the House for ratification, we have just heard from the minority leader who is saying that we shouldn't be dancing already. But Mr. Forsen, given the uncertainty and the weight of the crisis that you have constantly painted to us here on Top Story, wouldn't you applaud government for pulling this one off? Why are you being party poopers?
To start with, let me say a very good evening to everyone, and to say that yes, there is some good news that at least the government working with the IMF has come to some form of agreement in understanding what Ghana would need to bring about the stability we are all looking for. That is certainly a good news. But it is too early for us to celebrate because it's contingent on so many other things. The first one has to do with debt restructuring. And in itself, it has three key pillars. We have seen an announcement of the first pillar. And the first pillar has to do with domestic debt restructuring or domestic debt exchange. And we're all witnessing what is happening a wholesale rejection of the domestic debt exchange. The IMF has made it clear today that until we see significant progress and acceptance of domestic debt restructuring or debt exchange from creditors, they will not be able to go to their board for approval.
I'm sorry, that's not exactly what we heard from the IMF, Dr.
What
Forson.
did they say?
The IMF is saying that as far as the details are concerned, it remains a sovereign decision how government would go about the debt restructuring program. All it needs is enough, indication that this is being done and that government indeed has a program that will work.
Can I read some portions of the press statement as posted in the IMF website to you?
Please go ahead.
For a second, I want to grab it. He said, to support the objective of restoring public sustainability, the authorities have announced a comprehensive debt restructuring. Sufficient assurance and progress on this front will be needed before the proposed fund-supported program can be presented to the IMF Executive Board for approval.
Yes.
So I'm reading this from the IMF website. And
yes,
you can
but as we had Stefan Rode mention today when asked the question,
I am reading something from the IMF website, and I've pointed
but
you to the
but
place,
the
and you are
people
saying what you have heard from one side.
No, but this is Mr. Forson. Just a minute. This is from Stefan Rode, who led the team today.
Yeah, he spoke,
that announced,
but it doesn't mean he spoke everything. I'm reading from their website. Can you check now? Go to their website now and check.
I actually have that in front of me, but I'm saying that he clarified that this is with regards to our external creditors, that they need those assurances before they could actually present the deal, the staff level agreement, to the executive board for approval.
Can I assure you that I did not hear Stefan, and I'm sure he didn't only speak to you. He spoke to all of us. In fact, he met with the Finance Committee of Parliament a couple of minutes ago. We left the meeting at 5 o'clock. Okay, so when we say debt restructuring, as I said, it has three pillars: domestic debt restructuring, external debt restructuring, and then bilateral debt restructuring. We are talking of first leg, and the first leg has to do with domestic debt restructuring. The three put together makes debt restructuring. In the statement they released, they did not say domestic debt restructuring. They put all of it together as debt restructuring. Remember, you will need a combination of the three before your debt becomes sustainable. So you will not need only one to make your debt sustainable. For the finance minister to say that Ghana's aim is to achieve debt sustainability by reaching debt to GDP in present value terms by 2028 at a rate of 55%, you will need a combination of the three. So don't let no one create impression that it is only one item we are talking about. And that is why I started by saying that the first focus is domestic. After domestic, you will need to achieve sufficient progress and get buy-in from the creditors, one, before they go to the board. Two, external, you will need sufficient progress and acceptance from the external bondholders, Euro bondholders, before they go to their board. And then you will need to start the progress also on the parish club for you to agree on what we want to do. The trade package put together is what will show you how you can achieve the debt sustainability before they go to their board. So I'm saying that it's a good news to start with. But obviously, that does not mean that we should go and sleep. The work has just begun. Ghana will now have to do a lot more work. And the work will mean the Ministry of Finance working with the government must engage more by getting particularly the domestic bondholders to agree on the terms and maybe accept a proper counter offer coming from the domestic bondholders. And then also work on the external bondholders for them to also accept. If they accept, then the IMF will be able to go to their board. I envisage that from now to that time, we will need a minimum of 3 to 6 months before the IMF can go to their board.
And so you're saying that the first quarter assurance given by the finance minister to close this deal is not realistic?
You see, it is contingent on what he does. Okay, so let's face it. The first point is the government has announced an offer for domestic bond exchange. 1 week is almost gone. We are not hearing any good news. So how could we celebrate? Until that point, what do? We are in for a long haul. What happens to the other one, the external bond holders? You've just announced that you are going to do debt restructuring. The contours has not been announced. No one knows what is going to happen. Ghana will not be the only country in the world that has done it. Some countries have done it in the past. For example, Greece and that of Jamaica. How long did it take? Their best practices and case studies. It took 6 months before they arrive at that.
And in fact,
so
Mr. Forson, the finance minister actually referred to Jamaica and all these examples that you give and said that based on how we've been able to pull this off, we should have confidence in government to be able to fast-track this as well, so that by first quarter of 2023, we should seal this off and have an agreement with government.
I think it's an ambitious target. I don't think first quarter is feasible. I think it is more of second quarter before they will go to their board. Even if you achieve agreement in the first quarter, they can't go to the board the next day. Right. Obviously, they will have to prepare to come in. And as I said, they are best practices. We've seen it play out in certain countries, and we know the timelines that they took before they arrive at that. None of them took 2 months. None of them took 3 months, because the issue on the legalities of the matter takes some time. And then obviously the financial issues, and for these companies to agree, it takes a while.
Well,
so
they have announced meetings with these stakeholders. We'll be following that keenly to see what becomes of that. But you want the deal brought before the House. What is the legal basis for this request? Okay,
so first to start with, you agree with me that the Constitution of the Republic, in Article 1815, demands that all international economic business transactions must be appeared before Parliament. If you are going to restructure your debt that was approved by Parliament and change the terms and conditions in line with Article 1815, certainly you will need to come back to Parliament in Article 1815 for us to ratify or approve that deal before you do it. So we are demanding that the deal in question, the debt restructuring, particularly the external, would need to come under Article 1815. Of the Constitution.
Have we always done it in the past, whenever we went to the IMF? In 2015, for instance, did we do that?
Okay, so in 2015, Ghana did not restructure its debt, and this is the first time Ghana is going to restructure its domestic and external bonds. That has never happened in the history of Ghana, and this is the first time we are going to see one. And that is why you cannot equate the 2015 IMF agreement to that of the current one that we are talking about.
Dr. Forson, kindly hold the line for me, because the finance minister has a request of Parliament, especially your side of the House. But let's speak to Professor Godfred Bokpe, an economist at the University of Ghana. Prof, I'm grateful that he could join us here on Top Story. We have a staff level agreement. Enough basis to celebrate, or we should take the advice of the minority to hold our horses?
Yeah, I think that we have to proceed cautiously. It's a first important breakthrough, but remember that staff level agreement is not a program. It necessarily doesn't trigger inflows from the IMF. I think we are at this stage now because of the particular nature of the 17th IMF supported program, because we made the application at a time when our debt is unsustainable, and therefore there's now a gap between reaching staff level agreement and then IMF executive board meeting, which means that certain prior actions, which may also include debt restructuring, would have to be undertaken before the staff level agreement goes to the executive board for approval.
We saw a situation where many of the stakeholders, as far as our domestic debt restructuring or debt exchange program is concerned, were taken by surprise. Going forward, as we launch the negotiations with our external creditors, how do you advise government proceeds in order to make this more successful, so we can seal the deal as early as they envisage for us to do so?
Yeah, clearly, if you see where we are, the IMF has put the ball in government court, right? They have demonstrated commitment, in fact, more than a commitment. They have worked around the clock to reach a staff level agreement. Now, if it delays before it goes to the IMF executive board, all that the fund is saying is that then you should know it's up to Ghana, because the IMF doesn't restructure countries' debt for them. the debt arrangement is between the country and creditors. So, but unfortunately, the approach the government has used is what has elicited the pushback, because the government more or less tried to trick the market, try to ambush the market. But you don't work that way. Consultation, consensus building is the way to go. But I would have been surprised if the participating financial institutions had accepted the debt offer under these current terms. Clearly not. I mean, so government needs to revise it to the extent that these are prior actions, these are condition precedent to we having a program. Government needs to take it serious, government needs to engage, government needs to revise the terms. You also see a bit of unfairness, right, in terms of the fiscal level adjustment and then the debt operation, because the government is doing minimum in terms of the expenditure-based fiscal adjustment. The burden is now shifted to debt operation, and that is just too much for creditors to absorb. Of course, we don't know the terms of the external debt restructuring, but what has been announced for the domestic debt is too steep, it's too draconian, it's too drastic, right? So we cannot, all in the name of restoring the balance sheet of the public sector government, systematically weaken the balance sheet of financial institutions. That will compromise our medium to long-term growth prospects. Remember, at the end of the day, we want to rebuild. We want to return to inclusive growth. We want to boost inclusive productivity growth. You need a strong banking sector. You need a strong financial sector to support overall government economic strategy.
Right.
So you don't weaken their balance sheet in the manner that government had proposed. Already, if they mark to market government financial institutions, it's already translating to huge income losses. And some of them under Basel II, right, they may have to bring additional capital. So you don't do that. I think that government, I'm not too sure government fully analyze the implication of the debt exchange they announced and whether the financial sector balance sheet will be able to absorb that.
And Prof, do you see a situation where the, for want of a better expression, the failure of a possible failure of this debt restructuring program, the domestic one, may derail the staff level agreements that we've secured with the IMF? Is there any going back on this?
No, I think that where we are, it's easier going forward than going back, right? So having reached a staff level agreement, I think what government needs to do is to adopt a listening attitude and broader consultation and embrace alternative, right, in the name of reaching. So, and to do so, I think that if you look at the 2023 budget, there is still considerable scope for expenditure-based fiscal adjustment, which will also contribute to lessen the burden of sharing on the financial sector. Because the point is that we are looking at achieving a primary surplus overall of not less than 8% the next 4 years. Right. Even if we say the next 6 years, then we are looking at not less than 6.5%. That is huge. There's no requirement that we should close that or all of that from debt operation. So fiscal adjustment must do a little bit more. And that is why we are talking about the size of government, number of ministries, and then reviewing government social programs that are expensively arranged with fiscal implications so that you begin to also create room as a way of lessening the burden on the financial system, because we know the financial system is the ultimate residual risk claimant of public debt overhang. But we don't have the balance sheet to be able to take on all that haircut. So the point that we are making is that I think there's a general acceptability that a certain level of haircut is unavoidable. But the government must be prepared to also accept the option where people want to choose the kind of hairstyle that they want to have.
Right.
That is part of the consensus building.
Right. Prof, thank you very much for your time. And I think it's good time to get the reaction of Dr. Kezola to Forsen on this. The finance minister, whilst assuring that they're working very hard to get the buy-in of stakeholders and make sure that we proceed rather rapidly with this program, also called on Parliament to contribute its quota by by approving of the tax handles and all the revenue measures to improve revenue mobilization and get the country back on that path of economic recovery. Will you give him that assurance of your support to get us going?
I think I will expect the Ministry of Finance and the Minister in particular to rather consider cutting expenditure. Because clearly, if you were to look at the budget, and as Professor Bakpin rightly said, you are seeing an elevation of expenditure from prior year. That isn't good enough. If, as a government, you have planned a country of this nature in the magnitude of economic crisis that we are witnessing, clearly, it is important that the government itself will have to accept responsibility and cut expenditure by leading the way before you transfer the burden to the taxpayer and creditors. But unfortunately, the adjustment we are seeing is one way. We are seeing one-way adjustment where the creditor is being forced to accept a draconian haircut, very bad taste form of haircut. And the taxpayer is also being called upon that even though inflation has gone extremely high, you will still have to accept taxes that will increase the prices of goods and services. All what we are asking is that, Mr. Minister, please reduce expenditure. And if you show us the way, we will also certainly support you to implement your programs. But we cannot, as opposition, accept for a government to live large, continue living large, fail to cut expenditure, at the same time wanting the ordinary Ghanaian to suffer on the back of their own largesse. No,
and Dr. Foss, in just 10 seconds, since you raised your objection to the 2.5 VAT introduced in the budget, have there been engagement on the part of government to get you to either understand or approve of the tax handle?
No, this is a government that does not believe in consensus building. They think that you should always accept whatever they say. They've never consulted any of us and had any agreement with us. So we are where we are, and as a minority, and even my leader has not said to us that they have approached him. So we are where we are.
Well, thank you very much for your time. That's Dr. Kezula Tuforce, his ranking member on the Finance Committee of Parliament. And that's it for Top Story, brought to you by Vodafone. Further to